complement each other. So the strategic priorities for AIA Minnesota include building and mentoring the profession, making architecture accessible, understandable, and highly valued, taking immediate bold action to address climate change, and also to foster equity, belonging, and agency for women and people of color. And if you're familiar with the framework for design excellence, there's a lot of strong overlap with some of those goals and objectives, or I guess rather strategic priorities. So the framework for design excellence, there's 10 general categories. And we know that sort of going right out of the gate with trying to get all of those as elements for achievement for submissions would be pretty strong ask. So the goal was to slowly incorporate that language, not only into the honor awards, or that framework rather, into the honor awards, but across several of the other awards that the committee sort of oversees. And so just quickly, those elements of the framework, if you're not familiar, include design for integration, design for equitable communities, design for ecosystems, design for water, design for economy, design for energy, design for well-being, design for resources, design for change, and design for discovery. So in terms of how we thought to best approach that and integrate it, we developed something that we're calling the accommodations for excellence. Chris, did I say that exactly right? I might have misspoken, but the accommodations really are there. Firms are able to submit projects that could win those separately or in addition to the honor award. So it is quite possible that one project achieves several of those accommodations. It's really up to the jury at the time that is selected to kind of understand what the projects are submitting their goals as, and which categories they best land in. And I think I'll leave it at that. I don't know, Chris, if there's any other areas that I missed, but at a high level, that was the intention of what we've set forth.
Yep, and the the main differentiator is we were asking in the submissions that entrants address 2 or more of the framework for design excellence principles. If the jury, I'm just repeating what Rebecca said, but if the jury deems a project to have demonstrated excellence in at least 2 of the framework design measures, it's eligible for an honor award. They can honor it with an honor award. With excellence in 1 category, they can get a commendation for excellence. And winners of commendation for excellence are allowed to resubmit for a full honor award. Not that the commendation is a lowly award or anything, but you are allowed to resubmit for an honor award in subsequent years. So thank you, Rebecca. With that, we're going to turn it over to Sarah Imhoff from Imprint Architecture and Design to get her. She's going to share her screen here while we're getting ready for her presentation, and she'll walk us through her submission for Jewel Box Cabin last year.
Let's see, maybe I should share. Hi, everybody. Going to see if I can share just the PDF so that you don't have to look at the viewing box.
This looks great.
So we submitted the Jewel Box Cabin up in Lewiston, Minnesota for the honor awards, obviously. And we did submit the year prior and submitted again. And it was, in a way, it was kind of helpful because we were able to reconfigure the layout of the submission the second year. And so sometimes it's nice to be able to put something together and then come back to it a month or so later and take, rather than, I'm sure the first year we scrambled and tried to do it like the day before. So anyways, it's always nice to have a little bit of time to go away from it and then come back to it and see if you'd make any changes. The rule, as Chris stated, the rules were you have to submit for at least 2 of the number of accommodations, and we submitted for design for economy and design for well-being. Some of the other questions that have come up is the cover sheet. So the cover sheet has this certain size font and that they want to see on the very front cover sheet. But then for our submission, we went ahead and made the rest of the subsequent sheets read as 2 8.5 by 11 pages side by side for our presentation. So that seemed to work out well. I think the first time we submitted, we may have done that incorrectly and had photos that didn't lay out in this format. So starting with the cover sheet and the required font on the 8.5 by 11, and then moving into the rest of the slides that are, Chris, what would you call that if they're not, or 11 by 17s, I guess, if they're two sandwiched together. But anyways, that's the approach we took. So the first image that we chose was basically we wanted to grab the attention. So we chose our favorite image that seemed to be the kind of wow moment, I guess. A lot of people love the Twilight photo. So we went with that one. And then the rest of the design, we wanted to tell the story. So the second page, we showed a site plan to kind of just get an example of the lot that we were on Caribou Lake, the clients were on Caribou Lake up in the Lutsen area, and then the existing, the proposed footprint of the jewel box cabin. So we showed that, and then we just short description of where we put it on the site. So, and what it was. And then overall, here's a nice aerial image that shows contextually how it's sitting and where the lake is. So we also tried to limit the amount of language, like words that we put on every page, because it seemed that we didn't want to knock the jury over the head with too much wording. So we tried to limit that. So then the third page just shows more exterior photos. So starting with kind of the outside of the house, and then we eventually worked our way to the inside of the house, or the cabin rather, but just telling the story of what does it look like on the site. And then when we noted design for economy, we did that on this particular page, and we talked about efficient site planning, efficient space planning, materials and maintenance. And we wanted the image that we chose to be able to represent those things that we were talking about. So that would be that page. And then we went away from wording and just put some more nice eye candy on the slides. So more photos. So then moving in now to the inside of the house, we show a floor plan so the jury can understand how the space is laid out. And then we discussed a bit about design for well-being, which was the second commendation that we were seeking. So talking about, again, light, views, biophilia, comfort and happiness, and choosing a photo that maybe represents those design elements, and then leading into those inside photos. So, and at the bottom, we put just a couple notes that talked about some of those things that we were mentioning prior to, in the slide prior to. Another interior photo, and then another interior photo, and another interior photo. And then finally, the last page, which was interior photos. So I think the first time we submitted, we kind of finished with an exterior photo, but this time around, we decided just to lead with the exterior. What does that look like? And then eventually dive into these interior photos to round out the rest of the design for well-being statement that we were making in the later half of the submission. So that was it. I'm kind of scrolling fast, but anybody have any questions at all?
I'll just interject that as someone who's been watching the jury unfold for the last too many years. I won't tell you how old I am. But this is a really efficient submission in terms of letting the photography do a lot of the talking with some well-placed text. Can you go back to the design for economy page or yeah.
Let's see, there we go.
Yeah. We want to make sure that people understand that with the inclusion of the framework for design excellence, we really want to give the jury some something to hold on to as they're making their selections and having their discussions. But this isn't COAT top 10 level documentation that we're asking for that you might find in that award submission. And Sarah and Jeremy did a really nice job with some really efficient copy that speaks in a way that resonates with those principles, with a photograph that resonates as well. Juries really appreciate well-organized inclusion of the framework here, design for economy and design for well-being, and then the little captions on the other photos that call back to some of those elements that are designed for well-being or economy. So I also y'all, you can go in a sec. I also love how distinct this is from what Alex and Adam are going to present. These are two different sides to winning an award here. So I think we got really lucky inviting these two to talk, because you're going to get the whole gamut of how to be successful with an award submission. Sarah, I didn't mean to cut you off. Great.
No, that's okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the nice compliments. I can speak to your comments, and we submitted 1 year, and then coming back to it the following year, we reworked our verbiage. It was similar in layout, but we really tried to hone in on every sentence that we were saying and delete words if they weren't necessary. So we literally were just trying to deduce what we were trying to say down to the least amount of words possible, because I feel like a lot of time, especially for this little cabin, the pictures kind of speak for themselves a little bit. So we didn't want to spend a whole lot of time for the jury to have to read too much, of the same language over and over again. So yeah, so it was it was really helpful to write it out and then come back to it later and make adjustments and edits. And again, just trying to show those photos. I know I already mentioned this, but the first time we submitted, we started with an exterior and then we ended with an exterior, but this time we just started with the exterior, the photos, the site, and then right up front talked about what we were trying to portray, the design for economy, and then again, design for well-being. And then we followed it up with just a number of simple pictures after that. So getting those commendations up front, so that they could understand, okay, what am I looking for here when I'm scrolling through the rest of the images? What should I be keeping my eye out for? So.
Sarah, great. We'll come back with more questions for you from the group. I'll let you stop your screen share and let Alex and Adam take over. I do have one question in the chat that maybe we can fill a little air while Alex and Adam are getting set up with their submission. Question for you, Sarah. What software did you use to lay out your pages?
Oh, great question. We use PowerPoint. And I love PowerPoint because you can set the page size that you want, and it's just a very, very easy. Photos can be cropped and resized, and the text can be squished and enlarged, but I'm a big fan, so we use PowerPoint. I'd be curious to know what the other guys use for Avivo Village.
Hey, Chris, can you hear us?
Sure can.
I'm going to sign off and come right back because my computer is frozen.
Okay.
I don't know how to spell PowerPoint. Is that all one word? Anyways, if it's all one word, I don't know, but I'm responding there. So, and then we exported it as a PDF.
Gotcha. Makes, yeah.
Yeah,
super easy to do.
we exported it as a PDF, and then we downsized the PDF.
Great. Yeah, back in we went digital more than several years ago, but when I first started, we had the booklets, and I'm sure folks were using InDesign and required maybe a little more of a sophisticated tool, but PowerPoint, Keynote, others can do a great job with these submissions. So
yeah, it's great because PowerPoint remembers your margins and kind of where you're centering your pictures from the slide, and you can easily copy a slide and duplicate the page. So it's,
there you go. Any other questions from the group that's attending for Sarah while Alex and Adam are getting reestablished? Take a little while for things to be typed into the chat function. While we're waiting for another question or two, I'll note that the award force is open. One thing that comes to mind is because I was involved in it. One change to the award system, if you all are used to the award force last year, it's pretty much the same submission process, except that we're asking for higher resolution images to be uploaded from the start. We used to ask for just 3 high-res images and the rest low-res, but we found that as we were trying to get the presentation together, that we were having to go back to firms that won, asking for photos very suspiciously, image files. So this year you'll note that there are still some file size limits, but we're asking for higher resolution images of all the new photo. All of the before photos needn't be provided if you're using those for any reason. If it's a renovation project, you needn't provide those high resolution because often they're not. But we're asking for a decent resolution for all the other images. That will be one change you'll encounter in award force. Looks like we've got Adam and Alex back, and they're probably getting ready to share their screen. I see one other question. Oh, Sarah just answered in the chat. They're asking, Daniel asks if Sarah and Jeremy used less text than in their second submission when they came back for a second time to submit the award. Sarah just responded, probably 1/4 more text than what we presented.
oh, so the first time around, we used about 1/4 more than what you see.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting there. That was a perfectly timed freeze up on my computer. So welcome to the world of IT at AWH.
Perfect. We see it perfectly now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Chris, for inviting us. This was a hard project, but also very rewarding to work on. When we thought about, I mean, no offense to AIA, but don't really like to submit for awards, and so I don't know why, but we felt like this one did need to be, at least let's give it a try. And I think we felt like it needed some recognition just to get the word out, sort of, which is you'll see in our submission is very, very wordy. It's not, frankly, it's not a really sexy project. Doesn't have beautiful stairs or anything, but it's just really what the program that we were trying to serve and the model that we were trying to create, which was sort of between the codes, basically, and between the homeless shelters that are cot cots in a basement church to a affordable housing. There's this sort of missing middle. So we really felt like getting the word out on this through this venue was a good worthy cause. And so we, and Adam was frankly the one that put most of the submission together with a few others here in the office. And I think we, did use a lot of words, used a lot of graphs, and sort of trying to compare and contrast with, just the things that we were grappling with and the things that, internally and externally, from code to the environment that we were in, just coming out of George Floyd and all this. So, and Adam, we can talk more in depth about it, but we didn't, unlike the previous submission, it wasn't like, okay, well, we're trying to, it's designed for excellence or integration, what are the bullet points in that? Kind of like throughout the text, we really felt like, there's equitability, economy, and change were sort of the three things that we felt like it geared most towards. But if you looked at it one way or the other, it might fall into one or all the categories. So we just felt like, well, why don't you explain? So you put these sort of diagrams together. And
yeah, we basically got together as a group and talked about the story of the project, because the reason there's so much text is that there was a lot of ins and outs. There was a lot of context, and there was a lot of like things about this project that the images just don't tell. And so we got together, diagrammed how the story would work and what kind of images would tell that story. And I think we thought of the framework as like bullet points we wanted to hit within our narrative, but we didn't necessarily structure our narrative like to be based on those. We didn't have like a paragraph about how it fit equitability or economy or change. We just tried to hit those things as sort of a byproduct of this larger story. Which,
yeah,
I don't know if that on the inside baseball, how the jurors perceive that, but we felt that was the sort of right way to tell this like long.
yeah. Well, go to some of those images. So, here's sort of context of homelessness in Minneapolis, but also sort of set that time frame of this project. We were working with one of the guys that did the navigation center, which was kind of like the precursor to this a few years ago when we were dealing with all the tent camps that exploded. And so wanted to kind of set it in that context. And then I think the next slide, this is in the context of where we actually, we looked for a bunch of different sites. And so we wanted to show like, okay, well, here's where we ended up with, and here's the surrounding context. And then, there's this sort of real divide that was created from, well, what would you call that? Putting 94 in, but the mapping prejudice kind of approach. And that Aviva Village is kind of putting that next or knuckle of all that happening. So these are, really just timelines and photographs and aerials of that.
And the timeline for the project was really compressed. So like our permit and our certificate of occupancy were granted on the same day, which is
so I don't know how that came across, but yeah, we were, I think this compressed timeline of, just the crisis that was happening and the immediacies that it needed to happen. Winter was coming. This was something that there is no like actual occupancy type for this to tell the code official to, mark it down in your code narrative. And so to just talk about how that all got compressed, and you can imagine in that 7-month period, hopefully what comes through here is just the sort of craziness that was going on.
In terms of images we did have of what was actually built in this warehouse, we tried to show just sort of like that it was a really conventional warehouse space with this like standard bar joists and everything, and what we put inside of it was really unconventional. And also that it is, what's the word I'm trying to say? Oh, the point I was gonna make is that we're trying to be really careful with entourage because we wanted to show this space occupied by people because it's a space
Oh, yeah.
for people specifically, but we wanted to be very careful about like how we represented people. And so that I think whenever we show people in the space, we just try to do it in kind of this like abstract,
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
diagrammatic way.
That's not a real dog you saw in the previous one. But no, that's very, I mean, I think we probably could have asked permission to take photos of people, but we just felt like that's not, we don't want this to be associated with actual, you know, faces and people.
The other kind of image we had was this sort of diagram, which is to show that this project is fitting in between, it's like expanding the gradient of housing, it's fitting in between like low income, subsidized housing and traditional shelter models. And also that this building is a location for people who are experiencing homelessness to receive like care that outside of just a bed, they're receiving like healthcare and mental health and job placement and all that's happening on site. So this building is more than simply a shelter. It's like also part of this like sort of social safety net. And so another piece of the story that was told by diagram rather than like a traditional representation of architecture.
Right, yeah, it's hard to show that in a bunch of different photos, but this axon shows it pretty clear on how the services wrap the individual dwelling units. What else? I think one of the other things that probably hopefully came through in the submission was the hammering in on equitability and I mean the design, but also, you know, the purpose of this was again that sort of missing middle in homeless shelters where it's a low barrier. Each person has their own room, their own window. It's lockable. They can come and go as they please, and kind of really getting that. Let's go to that slide there. That kind of private room sense was something that we wanted to really highlight as it being, you know, in terms of it being an equitable way to treat, you know, people that are experiencing homelessness, rather than, you know, they get tossed out on the street during the day now and in traditional homeless shelters. So, and then what I think what came out of this actually, you know, after it being occupied for 6 or 7 months, because it's from September, is they started to just this sort of like wonderful layer of like their own personal stuff started to come into play within their windows and on their doors and things.
Like a very simple piece of making a nest for yourself or like a space that's yours,
Right.
which would be really hard to do in a traditional shelter model. So
Right, and it wasn't like, you know, you had to wait for that to happen. You know, it couldn't have been like, oh, let's go take the photos right after it opens. I mean, this is another layer that was just kind of happenstance, really. I mean, we sort of planned for it, but so anyway, is that enough rambling or should we go on?
there's some questions in the chat. Or those from before.
No. Chris, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was in on the jury discussions, and they, you know, architects are famous for being able to read, you know, 98% of what they think they need to know about a project in the photos alone. But they really appreciated how the photos and the renderings and axons and diagrams did tell the story, but how well organized the text was, where they wanted to dive in and understand a little bit more about the program for this project, the need for this project, where it slotted in, what was innovative about it in terms of its approach to housing. And interestingly, you talked about economy and equity, and one other thing. They really were struck. They were just struck by how humane this project was and how thoughtful it was toward the residents, and gave it a commendation for well-being.
Okay.
So. You never know what the jury is going to glom onto, but that's where they kind of felt the most passionate about the project as they reviewed it. There is a lot of text here, but it's really well organized and it can be read where the jurors want to read it. I think one of the benefits we had in going to a virtual jury is that they do their initial review on their own before we even get together, not in a hotel suite like we did for however many decades, where they're all looking at each other, flipping through the books or using their laptops together. And I think that allows them to take a little more time with the submissions that they want to review. So just want to say that it's great that we have this submission here for those of you who have projects that are just have more complex stories to tell, where jurors may want more information after they've done their initial flipping through of all the visuals in the book. So any questions? I'll let them start to fill in here on the chat for either Alex and Adam or for Sarah.
To reiterate something that Sarah said, which was, I think you did a first submission, then you let some time go by and kind of revisited it, and that was an asset for producing a winning submission. And I think this, we planned to submit well ahead of the award because we knew that setting up the narrative was going to take a while, and we edited that text in particular many times.
Not over years.
Yeah.
There was a story from one of our firms. I won't, it's not that I'm afraid to name it, but I won't name the firm, but spent a couple of years with a certain kind of submission for an award. It didn't win either an AIA Minnesota award or a national award. They took another go at it with fresh eyes. They reinvented the submission, and the very next year won AIA Minnesota Honor Award and an AIA National Honor Award. So there's a lot to going back to submissions, either, after a little bit of time after you've finished it, if you can manage that. I know how stressful it is to pull these submissions together, especially with photography that's coming in very late for those projects. But if you have time, it certainly makes a lot of sense to go back at it with some fresh eyes a little later. So I got one question here in the chat from Kelly. Any idea on average how many submissions are turned in each year? We're pretty steady right now at between, I want to say 58 and low 70s. It's pretty tight. We're typically getting 58 to 70 to 75 issues or submissions each year. A good, I don't want to give a fraction to it, but a noticeable number are resubmissions, and those resubmissions have won. Sarah talked about Jewel Box Cabin winning in its second go around. So different juries look at different things, and there's always a chance to win on a second or a third try. Any more questions in the chat function? From Philip, do all winning submissions use all the pages available? I've seen them win and less, for sure. I would say that I've probably seen more submissions not make the final cut because too much was covered. And they're trying to be too exhaustive with the documentation on the project. But I've also seen projects where you could tell the architects were being very artful, or the submitters were being very artful about what they're showing about the project, and jurors can tell when certain pieces are missing. So I don't think you need to use every page to be successful by any stretch, as long as the jurors feel like they're really getting a full sense of the project.
We did this in.
Is that question, Sarah, for us?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
Adobe InDesign.
Okay. Great.
Daniel asks, how much time do you figure a judge spends on the initial pass, and then how long do they spend discussing each one as a group? I can't say for sure. I'm not there when they're reviewing their submissions at home or in their office and lead up to the jury. But how the process unfolds is we give them 2 weeks when the jury program is open for them to go into award force, and we send some, kind reminders along the way. We have them make some notes in the award force and ask them to at least give us a sense of where they're leaning after their initial pass. They can give a 1 to submissions that they're really high on, 2 that they want to spend more time discussing the projects with their fellow jurors because they think there's some virtue there, and 3 where they're not leaning toward awarding something. And it's very few projects are getting all 3s. There's always some interest in the vast majority of the entries that we get. So when we have our first jury session, it lasts at least a couple of hours, and they've come and they're all very familiar with the projects. We see that in the notes they've made in award force. They try to get down to a short list from the full 63 or 69 or however many submissions we have. We just kind of go through each entry and decide if it stays in for more discussion. Try to get down to 20, at least 20 in that first session. Then we have another session where we're diving even more into the short list and making final selections, and at the end, recording some comments for the projects that they've deemed winners of honor awards and commendations. So, Daniel, I don't know how much time they spend, but I just know that they're not confused about projects when we get to the first of the 2 online jury sessions. Alex and Adam, did all of these drawings that this axon, for example, did it exist before the submission and you were just using it? Did you adapt it, or did you create it new for this submission? That was an especially helpful, all-encompassing diagram for the jury.
We made it for the submission.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, we had a floor plan diagram like this in the design phase that's what we kind of came up with, that grid and where to disperse the services and all that around there. But that was more of a working drawing. There was not time in this process to put together.
Right.
We got hired in, what was it, October, and the first residents moved in December 31st. Wow. Yeah, it was very compressed.
This was a good, going through and pulling up the narrative was a really good,
Yeah.
where the project could happen for our own.
Yeah, for our own
very
benefit,
valuable
it
for
was
us.
really, yeah.
Mhm.
Even the diagrams and just reflecting back on, this sort of like the code juggernaut that we had to go through, and is it transient or non-transient, or self-care or not self-care, like all those different things that we struggled with, or not struggled, but just had back and forth with the code officials, to then use this award submission to kind of reflect back on, like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's why that's why we had 9 code alternates.
Way to frame the process of putting together a submission. It's like a valuable recollection of a project and its process.
Yeah, it's helpful just on its own accord.
On the time.
Yeah, since we have so much free time in this business.
I got another question. Philip is asking if some of the sustainability metrics on projects, if we're seeing more submissions with infographics, or is it still mostly photography and plans? Not so much true editorial looking infographics, but where there are metrics, they are included, and those are especially persuasive for jurors when there is either measured performance, especially if there's measured performance and not anticipated performance. And some of the projects that have won honor awards, including for design for ecology or water, energy, the projects that have won those have had beautiful photography, but they've also had some really hard evidence that have been included as well that have been persuasive. But I imagine infographics, which take complex amount of information and make it more visual, would be really effective with the jury. They're always looking for help in understanding a project's achievements beyond what they're able to glean from the photography. Sarah, when you had Jewel Box Cabin photographed, when you have any project photographed, do you go about commissioning any differently for awards projects that you plan to submit for awards versus just marketing? Did you have any additional photography shot for the second submission?
We didn't. For this particular cabin, we had Jim Kruger with Landmark Photography. I'd worked with him in the past, and he was so kind as to just charge us for the day shoot up here rather than, and he went up to visit like just for a weekend with his daughter. So he just came over to the site that day. We always try to get a day shot and then a twilight shot. So on this particular cabin, since it was so small, we were kind of milling around for a couple hours waiting for twilight to happen after we were done taking the day shots. So that's always a challenge. I know we have a number of projects we're trying to take photos for right now. And we do have we do have Corey Gaffer scheduled for one of them, just because we haven't worked with him yet, and he does beautiful photos. But in terms of, I don't know, I mean, it's never been for just purely editorial. It's more just for our website. It's never just been purely for an awards submission per se. So.
Okay.
But that's a good question though, for sure.
Any other questions, folks?
I don't have a question, but I did have a comment kind of piling on to the discussion of photography that I was struck by the there's like a really I don't know if this is a word, unsentimental quality to the Jewel Box Cabin photography. As Sarah was sharing the photos, I was struck by how how tightly cropped they were and how the photography really focused on the building. I mean, I can imagine if I was photographing a building like that, I would probably pull way back and show a lot of context because it's really beautiful up there. But these photos really focused on the building itself, which surprised me. I actually, it wasn't what I expected. And anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is I would commend the photographer for addressing the building so directly within that context when I would be tempted to include so much more of the forest and all that stuff. So
Sure.
I think it turned out really well as a consequence of that. I mean, I could imagine you addressing it in a less direct way that would be less successful.
Sure. Well, and to that point, he did have he had a drone there, and he had some photos from the lakeside and some that were just showing the overall landscape of the edge of Caribou Lake and all the properties along that. But in terms of, I guess, for the submission, we just focused on the building photos. We showed one aerial that, at the front where you can see the roof. I didn't really love that photo anyways, because you could see it. I felt like you were just looking at the roof, which isn't very attractive, but it was helpful contextually to see the lake. But I understand where you're coming from. The very front photo that's so direct the cabin was so pinned in to the site that Jim was literally like shoved up against a hill trying to take that photo and get the whole of the cabin into the frame. And then equally from the lake side, you're kind of, the clients didn't want to cut back any of the trees that looked towards the lake. So anytime you wanted to get a picture of the cabin, you were just kind of in the trees for the most part. So it was a challenging cabin to take a photo of to capture the overall, architecture, because it was just pinned in. So.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks for your comment there, Sarah. If we don't have any extra questions, I just want to point out that I just put my email in the chat box. You all will undoubtedly have some questions. If they're directed, if they're about just about anything related to submissions, you can direct them to me. If they're so technical and they're related to award force, I may pass them on to my colleague, Sherry Hansen, our communications director, who also works with the Committee on Design. If you happen to know how to reach out to Elijah or Rebecca or Doug, you can do that as well. They're really knowledgeable about how the awards program is facilitated and all that's gone into it. We'll be announcing the jurors very soon. We're just wrapping up our third and final jury invitation, and we'll have that news up on the AIA Minnesota site on the awards page. Yeah, we've got one more question from Kelly. Historical renovation projects, which have won in the past several years. Before after pictures, are they helpful? For sure. We don't have, I think we had some elements of some, not before photos in the Avivo Village, but there are true renovation projects. And for those of you who may want to see examples of that, I'm in the process of reaching out to some firms who have won for renovation projects to see if they would be willing to share their PDFs privately with anyone who's interested in seeing how that can be done effectively. So again, reach out to me by that email, and I will see if we can facilitate some sharing of some renovation submissions that were successful. So please do mark down my email, and I will get back to you right away, given the submission deadline is September 30th. That's still a ways off, but these submissions take a lot of time, I know, and ideally you want to create some buffer where you can put it aside for a week or at least several days before you come back at it to polish things up and make your submission. Don't get too stressed on September 30th. If you're having any trouble with the award force program or your connectivity, reach out to me or to Sherry Hansen, and we'll help you along. But that submission deadline is coming up. And again, the jurors, if you're interested in knowing who they are, we usually have an East and Eastern United States, Central United States, and Western United States a juror, folks that have won some national awards generally. And we also look at firm size and the project types that they do to create some variety among the three jurors. So we'll be doing that again this year, and we'll have the jurors to announce shortly. So lastly, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Alex and Adam. It's so helpful to have you share your approaches. Again, we love the distinction between your approaches, both of which were highly successful. Thank you for your time today, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.